She takes us out into the desert, and there's all these bald eagles flying around, and I jumped in the lake, and there was all these people with AK-47s just blasting them into the air, and there was like NASA moon buggies, and it was fucking wild.
Welcome to Atypical Daydream, a podcast about life on the road. I'm Josh, your host, and thanks for stopping by. My guest today is Frank Hurricane. He's a musician, songwriter, and a storyteller. Frank's stories are straight out of rock and roll lore and take us on tour to witness a life few can imagine.
Yeah, I was on a tour. It was one of the first long tours that I ever went on. It was a little over 2 months. It was like 65-day tour, something like that. And it was me. I'd been living in Boston, and then I had moved to New York and slept on my friend's couch in Queens for, I guess, 3 months. And me and my friend, Invisible Dave, his music is called Invisible Circle. And I was playing as Hurricanes of Love. Now I go by Frank Hurricane, but we recorded a split record during those months. We had that pressed to vinyl and then went on tour with this split. So we were together nonstop already for 3 months before the tour even started. And I mean, he's one of my best friends. So it just made sense. It was beautiful. And so it was me and Dave, two large bearded homies rolling in this mystical 2001 dark blue Volkswagen Bug cruising down the road. And we started out the tour in Boston. Then we played in New York, and we played a bunch of shows going down the East Coast. And they were, for the most part, they were really good shows. They were successful and stuff. And then we got to Florida, where shit started to go crazy. That's where it started to get real wild. Now, when we got to Jacksonville, the show was in the suburbs, in this, like, what you would imagine, like, rich grandma's kind of house, like huge mansions in this, like, nice place, but it was all these crusty homies. It was this guy, he was like a computer programmer or something, and he was renting this suburban house for some reason, and he just let all these crusties live up in there, and there was just tons of people living in this crazy house, but, like, on this, like, paved over swamp suburban paradise. And the house was trashed. There was this psychedelic dude living there in the living room. He had like this huge protrusion coming out of his forehead. His third eye looked like it was like about 6 to 7 inches coming out of his head. And he was chugged out of his mind. He was extreme alcoholic. Everybody in there was addicted to spice, which, is the fake weed stuff, the K2, the spice. And this was, like, spice has been getting more and more famous, and now I don't think anybody even puffs the spice maybe, but it wasn't recognized yet how messed up it was, but it was, people were getting crazy addicted to it, and it was just, like herbs with bad chemicals sprayed on them that everybody would puff, and it was highly addictive, and this house was just trashed, and it was covered in spice. I mean, there was just like, it was like Dune style, like the spice was everywhere, and there was a gravity bong in the sink. And the show was horrific. I mean, insane. There was like 12 bands played or something. Some of the acts were really good, and some of them were, I mean, it was like existential, make you want to quit playing music bad kind of stuff. And there was this guy, and he played a Natalie Imbruglia cover on his guitar, that song Torn, and he had an iPod backing band playing along with it. And when I saw that, I said, I almost quit playing guitar at that moment. And I said, I'm not playing guitar tonight. So I did a hip hop set instead. I was like, I can't play guitar after seeing that. So then, we partied all night. Homies were doing spice. We went to sleep, and the AC was just blasting, and woke up in the morning, and it was freezing cold up in there. And somebody had lent me like some crusty ass blanket, and I was sleeping under it, and this dude comes out, and it's freezing. I'd say it's 50 degrees in there, and he's pouring sweat, and he's going, "It's so hot in here. It's so hot in here. Losing his mind. And my boy Invisible Dave said, dude, it is cold in here. What is wrong with you? And the guy said, I need the spice. And he was scraping the counter trying to find little remnants of spice. And then, we had some good shows, a little nice run of good shows again. And then we ended up in Lubbock, Texas, which is like this college town you probably know. And it just smells horrific. It's like just cows everywhere. It's just the whole town smells like cows. Back in the day, I don't know if this still exists, but there was that DoDIY.org. And there was this website you could look up places, like people's houses, they'd book shows for you or whatever, and it was pretty cool. And so I'd met this girl on there, and she had said, yes, I can hook you up in Lubbock, Texas. So we went, and it was amazing. At the time, $100 at a show was like life-changing, and I think she's like, yeah, I can get you $100. I was like, that's amazing. But it turns out she's in high school. It's all high schoolers at this psychedelic art gallery, and they're all doing Yeti powder. They are wiling out. There was like this prog band of high schoolers, and it was like completely insane. And then there was a 311 Sublime tribute band of all these high schoolers that were all on crazy drugs and stuff. And it was called Stay Sane was the name of the band. And they had this pit bull, and the pit bull would jump up and hit you in the face. And all of the band members all had black eyes from this pit bull slamming them in the face. And it was so psychedelic. And I went down, I was like, yeah, I need some beer. And I went down to the gas station, and they were like, don't go down, don't walk down there. It's going to be real sketchy. And I said, okay. And I went down to the gas station, and there was a dude inside. He had a 40 in each hand, and he was spinning around like a windmill trying to knock people over with the 40s. This was inside the gas station. And I was like, man, Lubbock is off the chain. I found out the girl had told us there's like a special STD that they have in Lubbock called the Raider Rash. I guess that's like their team's name, the Raiders or something. And it's like a special STD you can only get in Lubbock, supposedly. And this place was just nuts. And then we did a big West Coast tour, we just had fun pretty much on that. But then we got to Vancouver. We were crossing the border into Vancouver. Now, we were smoking a lot of holy weed and stuff. My boy, Invisible Dave, he's kind of the opposite of me, similar but different. Like me and him, we even look like we're like brothers, I'm like a really positive person, and I like to, be loud and stuff. And he is he assumes the worst 24/7, basically, and is like really quiet for the most part. But he was really worried about crossing the border, because he had done it before. This was my first time crossing the border to play a show, but he had done it before, and he'd heard legends and horror stories. Now it's a lot easier. They passed some law where they made it easier to play in Canada. But at that time, it was really hard. You had to have all this paperwork. You had to lie about all this stuff. They'd search your car really crazy sometimes. Sometimes they just wave you through. So he was really paranoid. So we pulled over to a gas station. We spent like hours like vacuuming everything in the car and making sure all the stuff was out. But there was this joint roach that he knew was in the car. Like, we had been puffing a joint, and I threw it out the window, and he saw it come back in the back window, like the out and in style. And he knew it was in the car, and he couldn't find it. He could not find it. I was like, dude, I'm sure, it probably just flew out on its own. It's all good. Like, don't worry about it. And he was like, I know it's in the car. And I was like, okay, whatever, man. We just got to do this. We got to get across the border. So, and before we even get to the border, this is U.S. people stop us. And they say, hey, guys, and I learned a good lesson here. They said, hey, guys, what are you doing? And we were like, oh, we're playing a show. Here's our paperwork. We had the paperwork. They were like, what kind of music do you guys play? And I'm my dumb ass. I said, Psychedelic Folk. And they said, get out of the car. So They put us in this little steel room. It's like a little bunker, like straight something you see in like Saving Private Ryan or something like that. Like this painted little steel bunker on the side of the room, like check station. And the windows are big. There's no bathroom. My boy Dave had to pee really bad, and he's losing his mind. And we sit in there, and we're watching. They lock us in there, and we watch them remove everything from the car. And they rip the panels off the doors. I'm talking, they opened up parts of that car I didn't know existed. They're searching every bag. They're searching everywhere. They came into the shack. They unlocked the shack, and they say, "We found the Roach. We found the Roach." And we were like, "Oh my God. Oh my God." And we're like, "Yo, like, where was it?" And they're like, "In the back of the guitar amp." So in the back of the amp, somehow the Roach had flown out the window, back in, landed in the back of his amp that he was using for a keyboard. They said, "We found the Roach." And we're like, "Oh, we're fucked." And they were like, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." And they were like, "Where are the shrooms? Where are the shrooms?" And they're screaming at us, "Where are the shrooms?" And I'm like, "We don't got any shrooms." And then they said, "We found the rolling papers." And we were like, "Okay," because he used rolling papers to clean the reeds of his oboe out, the gumless rolling papers. And he was like, "We use those to clean out the oboe." And they were like, "We found the Roach. We found the Roach." And we were just like, "Oh, man." And then they said, "Have a great day, guys," and just let us go. Like,
Hey, Josh here. I love making this podcast, and I'd love to make it my full-time gig. Besides telling the stories, I'm basically a one-man band, and that takes time. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. You'll have access to loads of great bonus stories, and you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting a truly independent podcast. Find the Patreon link in the show notes. And thanks.
it was a mellow show. It was a pretty haunted gig. It was like poets put on the show, like some haunted poets, and it was really it was a pretty grim scene. But it was fun to be in Vancouver. You know, some of that Canadian pizza is really bad. We had one of the worst slices I've ever had in my whole life, which is hilarious. And then we rolled back out and we went to Olympia. And in Olympia, we played this amazing house show. It was awesome. And me and Invisible Dave, you know, we'd been doing great. But for some reason in Olympia, we just got into a fight. We just started wiling out on each other. I guess the stress of all the crazy. At this point, we probably played 40 shows, maybe more, 45 shows or something. You know, but then I apologized. I kind of wild out on him. You know, but there was tense vibes. So we're cruising down the interstate. We pulled off in that town, the Snoqualmie, like the native reservation town where like Twin Peaks was based and the waterfalls there and everything. The vibes are just really intense, you know. We knew something was going to happen. And we're driving. The mountains, I believe they were snow-capped. We were going through the Cascades there, going from Seattle to we were supposed to play in Spokane that night. So we're cruising down the interstate and engine starts to heat up. The car had been acting weird a bunch this whole tour, which was part of why we were kind of bugging out. It would overheat but there was no system to it. It didn't really make sense what was going on with the car. And it would never actually overheat. It was just say it was overheating, and we didn't really know what was going on. But all of a sudden, the engine was really, really overheating and started smoking real bad. And we pulled over, and turned out we were in this town, Coeur d'Alene, really tiny little place right there on the eastern side of Washington. Into the Cascades, like the Cascades end, the mountains end, and then all of a sudden you're in this flat land. And that's where the car died, at the edge of the mountains. We're sitting there in this grocery store parking lot, and we're just like, well, the car's obviously cooked, you know. we're screwed. I call up the homie and I'm like, well, we're probably not making it to the gig. And the car is maybe done. Maybe the whole tour is canceled. But like the problem was like we had all these records. We probably had 200 records. And he had his keyboard and he had his amp, and we had our bags. I mean, it wasn't like we could have just hopped on a Greyhound or something like that. I mean, we had all this stuff. We just didn't know what to do. We were kind of losing our minds a little bit and stressing. And this guy pulls up in this car right next to us in the parking lot, and he gets out. He's just kind of like 60-something-year-old dude, like lonely psychedelic dude. Becomes apparent pretty quickly that this guy is probably like a killer, a murderer, serial killer kind of vibe. He's like pulling out all these books. You guys, I got books on woodworking books, books on reading, books on writing. He's got all these books. He's like, I'm going to give you guys a ride to Spokane. Just get in my car. Get in my car right now. Get in the car. We're going to Spokane. I'm taking you to Spokane. And we were just like, I don't know, man. This guy, he's going to kill us if we get in the car for sure. Definitely. So he won't leave. He's just there. We're like, dude, we need our car. Like, coming up with excuses. But we're just sitting there. Engine cools down. I try to drive it a little farther. We get about 5 minutes on the road and it starts smoking crazy again. And we pull over and the engine's cooked. We know it's cooked. And we call AAA, but this guy's still chilling with us. He followed us, and now he's sitting on the side of the interstate with us. And then after that, AAA comes rolling up, and the guy's like, man, fuck them cars, man. VW, that's a piece of shit you got right there, buddy. And I'm just like, okay, hell yeah. And, serial killer Shrimp rolls out. But before he does, he says, listen, man, I know where you guys need to go. We said, where do we need to go? He said, Moses Lake. And we were like, what is that? Moses Lake. He was like, you just got to go there. And so we get in the tow truck, me and Dave, we're sitting there. We are losing our minds, but he especially is losing his mind. Like, I'm just like, I've accepted the fact that, we're just going to have to chug and just chill and figure it out. And we get in there and the tow truck driver starts telling us, about what's going down. And we're like, well, where should we go? And he was like, well, like the guy said, you should go to Moses Lake. And so we said, what's Moses Lake? He was like, well, I didn't know, but there's the desert in the eastern side of Washington State. There's a desert. And Moses Lake is like in the middle of the desert there in Washington. NASA tests their moon buggies there and stuff because I guess the surface there is the closest to the moon, supposedly. Literally, it's crazy. A friend of a friend calls us up and is like, hey, I know these people. They live in Moscow, Idaho, across the border there. And call them, that's closer to where you are than anyone else. And so we call them and they say, hey, we know someone that lives in Moses Lake. And there's a chance she may be able to help you out. And so we're like, okay. And so we call up this person after eating some deeply hated jalapeno corn dogs from the gas station there. And this woman is just this magical person. And she says, you guys can stay with me. So, after the first night, we didn't need to pay for a motel or anything. And she picks us up. She takes us to a burrito truck. She pulls out a big old bag of weed. We start puffing down. She takes us out into the desert, shows us birds. She's a bird watcher. And there's all these bald eagles flying around. And I jumped in the lake, and there was all these people with AK-47s just blasting them into the air. And there was like NASA moon buggies, and it was fucking wild. And then we get back to her place, and there's this big old dude out there with his whole butt hanging out the back, and he's like fixing a car in her driveway. And we're like, who's that? And she's like, oh, that's my brother. And I was like, oh, damn. Okay. By that time, we'd gotten a call from the car place, and they said, your head gasket's blown. I said, how much is it going to be? They said, like $3,000 or something crazy. This guy, I seen he was working on the car. I was like, is he a car mechanic? And she was like, actually, he is, yeah. And so I said to the homie, I said, hey, could you fix our car? And this was his voice. He was life-changing. Yeah, I can fix your car. I could do it for like $1,000, but you have to supply me with as many snacks and drinks as I require. And I was like, okay, hell yeah, dude. Now this guy, he was so psychedelic. He loved Tilts, which I don't think they make anymore, but it was like an energy drink, alcohol, sweet tea thing. And we'd get up in the morning. He was the worst snorer I've ever heard in my life. Now, it didn't bother me that much, but Invisible Dave is a very light sleeper and was deeply disturbed. And this guy, his snoring, it wasn't even snoring. It was like, this shit was just wild as hell. You know, the guy, he was kind of working on the car and I was helping him, but he was kind of just chilling too and chugging and puffing. One day he was like, I'm just going to take a break for a second. I'm just going to take a quick break. Let's sit down and watch some television. And so we're sitting there watching TV and he goes, oh, what's on the TV? It was Carpool, that movie with Tom Arnold. And he goes, we got to watch the whole movie. And then we watched Carpool with Tom Arnold. And he goes, I think I'm just going to chill the rest of the day. And so every day we're canceling shows that we're supposed to be playing. Finally, we got the new head gasket in and everything and sealed everything back up. It was time to put the key into the car and start up the engine and see what would happen. And I turned the car on and I mean, it was worse than it was before. And we were just like, oh no. And he goes, hold on a second. Let's go down the street to AutoZone. We got to go get some 5-minute epoxy. And we got some 5-minute epoxy. Stuck this one part on with the 5-minute epoxy. Car turned on. I threw the $1,000 out the window at him, and we peeled out that mofo. And I drove 27 hours to Minneapolis, and it was the most mystical drive I've ever taken in my life. And me and Dave are still really good friends. We didn't murder each other or anything like that. So, and these people that saved us, they just were the most magical people. Linda and Ron were their names, and they really saved the day. If it wasn't for them, we would probably be in Moses Lake still working at a hamburger place or something like that. So they were really the angels of the trip.
I want to thank Frank for sharing his experiences. Make sure to check out all his fantastic tunes and find him on Instagram at Frank Hurricane. This podcast was created and produced by me, Josh Caldwell. Music by Visual Aid, my side music project. General support and copywriting by Miranda Caldwell. If you like the show, please follow, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to financially support the show, check out my Patreon page. You'll have access to loads of great bonus stories. You can find the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back next week.